All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And have we got an amazing episode for you today? We are talking about the forgotten pillar. The forgotten pillar, folks. Tune in to see what that's about. And we're going to talk about don't wish for more, wish you were better. What else do we cover, Ben?
Well, Bryce, what has income, asset, and lifestyle got to do with that forgotten pillar? We're going to unpack that later today in this episode. And finally, Bryce, I'm going to actually say I really love your life hack today. So hang around to the end of the episode for that one because it's a ripper.
Folks, I'm floored. He loves my life hack. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance, and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And of course, Ben, I say it to you every week, welcome back to you too, mate.
Mate, thanks for welcoming me back. It's always good to be here. You know, I just love spending time with you. It's September, it's footy season finals. We've both got nothing really to do. We're down to the...
My backup side's potentially still in it. And I say potentially still in it, Ben, because by the time people are listening to this podcast,
yes.
I will be overseas, which means that we've pre-recorded this podcast. So you and I can't even say good luck to X and Y team because there's still 4 teams in it at the time of recording.
Yeah, well, that's right. But I can understand why you book your holidays in September because, I mean, you know, what's the chances of Freo actually being in there? Not really much. No.
Hey, it's funny you say that's fair. I'm fair game, right? I realise that until we get our first piece of silverware, I'm fair game. But I was listening to this podcast, Ben, the other day of Sam Cunnenberg, I think his name is. He started a business called Cloud Guru.
Okay, yep.
Are you familiar with that one? No?
Nope.
Basically, he's a Perth boy who lives in Melbourne, started this this cloud platform and sold the business for $2 billion, Ben. $2 billion. So he and his brother. So he's on the rich list, and he was being interviewed, and I found it fascinating. He was being a Perth boy, and at the very end of the podcast, Julianne Sprague, who's the host, says to him, she's a West Coast supporter, and she goes, "Look, dare I say this to you, but good luck this year," because it was recorded in 2024. Good luck this year. Fremantle are flying, so dare I say it, you might be able to break the duck. So they're going through this banter, and I'm listening to it yesterday thinking, isn't this interesting? Because this was done before Freo fell off the perch. Yeah. And then what I found interesting, and I said it to my wife too, was here he is going, I'm not sure that I want to get too celebratory because it is Fremantle and there's every chance that the other shoe might fall off. I think was his term, but he goes, but let's be honest, they're going pretty good now, so it's looking pretty good. And fast forward to when I'm listening to it, no, they didn't even make the final. Such is the torturous time of a Freo supporter. But
well, he can cry into his bath of champagne.
Very humble guy. Very, very humble guy.
Oh, that's cool.
Very,
that's a good
very
story.
sharp.
Love those stories.
But yeah, he. I think I'd rather be you, Ben, where I could go to and lose heaps of grand finals. In fact, lose the most amount of grand finals of any team.
There we go. Thank you. I'll catch that. I'll catch that ball. There we go.
Hey, Ben, we asked on this pre-recorded conversation, we asked last week if someone might vote for us. And so I'm just asking again if they're up for it. We're trying to, let's be honest, folks, we're trying to garner some support because these things only happen if you're prepared. The person who is listening to this now, yes, you, if you're prepared to actually press a link in the show description and vote for us, then we've got a chance, Ben. But if you've enjoyed the show and you don't do that, we won't get anywhere. So we're just kind of putting it out there and saying, if we've given you value, would you be prepared to vote for us? That's what we're saying, aren't we?
Yeah, we don't need any money. We just a little vote would be nice.
Maybe just
help us get noticed.
couple of finger taps on your screen. And our agenda is really simple. If we can expose our podcast to a wider group of people, that means more people get to listen. That's it. There's our agenda, folks. So if you get a chance to vote, thepropertycouch.com.au/vote. We would certainly appreciate that. And I guess we should round that out, Ben, and just say good luck to the two combatants this weekend.
Absolutely, and again, obviously it was RBA week as well, so it was a very big week. So I don't know what happened because obviously again it's pre-recorded, but let me see if I can predict what's going to happen and see if I was right.
Yeah.
Rates are on hold.
Come on, surely not.
Yeah, pretty safe bet there, right? That's why I went. I went there because it's safe.
What a genius, mate! You're amazing. The predictions that you're able to pull out like that is unbelievable. So,
no, I know my stuff, Bryce.
Let's be honest. Let's hope Sydney and Geelong are in the finals. There we go. We said it. Now that'll be awkward for us if it's a Port Adelaide Brisbane grand final, Ben. But
yes.
We know what that looks like. 119 points to
as long as Geelong don't thump Sydney like they did last time, right? That won't be fun to watch. I want a close game, but I want Brodie Grundy and Tay Adams to get some silverware.
Yep, there you go. Well, so did Jack Ginnivan, wanted to meet them, but that didn't work out so well for him, did it? So.
True.
Hey, my Mindset Minute theme today, Ben, is less a Mindset Minute and more of just a response to someone who's written a nice little bit of feedback for you and me here, right? But
nice.
This was from someone who's previously been on the podcast, Ben,
yes.
Summer Series. Going to keep them anonymous just because of some of the content, but previous Summer Series guest wrote this and said, "Hey, Bryce, quick shout out to encourage yourself and Ben and Ibis with the powerful messages you are providing like me week after week. Plot twist, it's nothing to do with property, finance, or money management. Your Mindset Minute and general push towards always getting better through reading and consuming content has paid off in my life in a big way. I recently applied for an internal position at the school I work at. The talent pool was of incredibly high caliber, and my thoughts through the whole process were just throw your hat in the ring and give it your best. After 2 grueling rounds of interviews, I have landed the dream role of assistant principal.
No.
I was and still am in complete shock that I was successful, and it hasn't yet sunk in. I've had time to reflect on my preparation and responses to the interview questions, and guess what? I owe it all to you and your mentoring over the 5G airwaves on the Property Couch. Thanks to author recommendations like James Clear, Morgan Housel, Stephen Covey, and saying things like plan to become what you plan to become, I was able to clearly articulate my vision, who I am as an individual, and how I can best support those around me. You guys are so much more than property experts. You are life coaches, encouragers, and beacons of positivity. How's my reading today? Mate, thank you so much.
Actually, that is wonderful, isn't it? It's beautiful.
It is a very encouraging message, and just congratulations to this person. He knows who he is. I've been tic-tacking back on email with him. But Ben, that's really encouraging. I'm reading a book at the moment by Robin Sharma, who is the author of the 5 a.m. Club, and it's called The Wealth That Money Can't Buy.
Ooh,
and
nice.
It's got 8 forms of wealth, of which money is actually in there, but I think it's number 5. But the first one is personal development. And he says that's the number one form of wealth that money can't buy, just the daily habit of reinforcing through personal development. So this came as a timely message because I'm about halfway through that book now. As I go on my runs, I've got it in my headphones. But it's just a principle to show that the daily action of building out your personal development and your professional development through some of these books, and hopefully, you and I are lifelong learners, and hopefully we've been encouraging our audience to do stuff like that. So my Mindset Minute theme today, Ben, is this stuff actually works. So it works in your life, Ben. It works in my life. And in this case, our Summer Series guest, it's well and truly paid dividends in their life.
And it builds off last week's message, Bryce, about taking the shot. Like ultimately, he took the shot. He basically said, I'm going to put my hat in the ring. Took the shot. Life is short. Take action. And so, I think it's a nice little sort of puts a nice little bookend on last week's message as well. So well done.
So another first here to this person here. After 513 episodes, Ben actually referenced something I said in a week before the episode, which is very, very rare. So
not true. It's not true. I can think of dozens of times.
Can't change the spots. Has it got anything to do with the fact that we recorded last week's episode this morning, Ben, and we're recording this week's episode this afternoon?
Oh, you're giving away the magic of show business, Bryce.
Very good. All right, today's topic that we're going to talk about is the stuff that nobody talks about, and that's the defence, Ben. So I wanted to flag a very simple scenario around the. We've spoken about defence before. We're going to talk about it in a specific way today, and we're also towards the end of the episode we'll broaden that out a little bit just to remind everyone on the bigger picture of defence. But
Sure.
I want people to imagine 3 concentric circles. I think I got concentric context right there, Ben. But you've got 3 circles that are all merged together, and where those 3 circles intersect is the sweet spot for defence. And so I want you to think about that image as we go through what we're talking about today, because we're going to talk about 3 core parts of the framework, which all represent a circle. But if you merge those together and get them all right, it's really that little sweet spot in the middle where all of them come together. So is that cool? You happy with that, Ben?
Sounds like a plan.
All right. So the first of those concentric circles in the forgotten pillar is all about your income. We think that the greatest wealth creation tool that anyone has is their income. So there's a couple of things that are part of the income, Ben. One is protecting it, and 2 is ideally growing it. And so the first part of what we want to talk about is protecting it, right, in terms of job security. So if it is the greatest wealth creation tool that you do have, being your income, that consistent income is definitely important for peace of mind and borrowing. So as part of a defence, it's always a prudent strategy, Ben, to make sure that you are doing whatever you can to make sure that your job is secure. And if it's not secure, you have got a contingency plan in place should anything happen for that particular job. Because if you have the house of cards and your income disappears during accumulation phase, that is a concern for anyone who wants to build a portfolio. And in some cases can be the reason why people don't put their hat in the ring, Ben, why they don't step into the arena.
Yeah, Bryce, the way in which I like to think about it is income gets you into the game. Like ultimately, you cannot build wealth that provides for your longevity if you don't have that income starting off. So income comes in, you trap the surplus, you put that surplus to work. So I always think about income as gets me in the game. And then ultimately, if I'm putting some of that income to the side, I can absolutely leverage off the back of that. Because what we're trying to do over the journey of wealth creation, that accumulation phase, is take a bit of that income out, and capital is replacing that thing that it's appreciating over time. So in business, same sort of thing. So businesses build up value, capital value, and they have an income derived off the back of that. So we're thinking about small businesses that we're in. We're in the small business of private rental accommodation. So in the start, we need to add that income, keep that income coming in. Over time, we're building an asset base. And then off that asset base is obviously then deriving us that passive income that that allows us our freedom of our time. So I think that's the really nice piece of what income from a job security point of view gives us. It gives us this opportunity to say, okay, I can enter the game and I can stay in the game that provides the fuel to the fire that allows me to build up that wealth accumulation over time.
Ben, the best saying that I've heard regarding job security is from one of the greatest virtual mentors I've had. It was the first personal development cassette tape I ever put in my university vehicle of a Mazda 323, Ben. I loaded the cassette tape up and it was How to Be a Winner by Zig Ziglar. And he said this, Ben, not on that particular tape, but over the journey, he said, do more than what you're paid to do, and eventually you'll get paid more for what you do. And I just, if you let that land, that is one of the greatest job security tools that you could ever do. Because if you are seen in your job as the person who does more than what you're paid to do, not only does it underpins that job security, because you're probably last out the door in any economic downturn or any downsizing or any retrenchment, do more than what you're paid to do. But the upside is this: eventually you get paid more for what you do. I love it. I think it is the greatest job security point we've got. So number one, in terms of this first circle, Ben, we're building these 3 circles. The first circle is the income. number one is you've got to make sure the defense part of it is shoring up your job security. The second part is how can you give yourself a chance to increase the amount of income? Well, that's to increase your skills, skill stacking. You start out, for example, as a bookkeeper, and then you move into an accountant. And then from an accountant, you might move into a financial controller. And then from financial controller, you might move into, doing deals or mergers and acquisitions. You start with a base skill, but you're always stacking these skills on top of each other. So the next part of the defense here is always upskilling and taking additional training wherever you can so that you can be growing at work. That also underpins the job security, but it also gives you the best chance of increasing your income.
Yeah, and obviously, running a business and having hundreds of staff and so forth as part of that. Some of the education you give to your staff is when they, talk about their professional development and what they need to do to potentially earn more. I always talk about a couple of important things. The first one is, yes, what income or value creation are you responsible for on the day-to-day part of your work, and how much of that do you control the result for? That's always going to be important to that. And that's why, to Bryce's point, building up that skill set and building up those layers is really important. The next one is obviously then, okay, how much responsibility does that have in terms of the overall responsibility of the business? So, if you're bringing in, $250,000 worth of income to a business, and that business's overall income is $500,000, your value is pretty high. But if that business's overall turnover is $5 billion, and you're bringing in, then it's always going to be relative. So it's always important to get context around that. The next important part, if you're thinking about how you're positioning yourself to your value to increase your skills and potentially increase that income, is what sort of people responsibility you have. So you might have people responsibility, you might have safety responsibilities, you might have some of these other responsibilities. And we all know that managing people for performance, individuals who have different views and ways that they look at the world, that's always challenging. So the more people you directly look after, or you have a management team that then looks after, those lines, so that is also going to be factored into your overall value. So what are you doing, coming back to the point around building on your skills? What are you doing to developing your people management skills? How are you developing your influencing and, getting an understanding and getting buy-in from those people that you're managing? They are all fundamental factors that are going to add to the story of the value that you bring to the business and the skills you do. And then the final one is the technical. So what sort of ultimate problems can you solve for? And these days it's more technically grounded. There obviously is a lot of slow logic and big decisions that need to be made about human behavior and human interest stuff. But in terms of how do you then solve for that technically, if you've got a lot of skill sets around all those technical pieces that you can bring together that ultimately increases productivity, which then flows to the bottom line, you're going to share in that success as well. So they're the sort of areas that I would always be thinking about when I'm looking at what do I upskill on, and where's my opportunity to continue to show value off the back of, obviously, again, coming back to, paid to do more than you're paid to do, and then ultimately you'll see benefit of that. I think if your managers and people are looking at that for you, you then become effectively highly prized as a high-performing person in that business, and you should be rewarded accordingly.
Jim Rohn says it best, Ben. He says, don't wish for more, wish you were better. And I guess that really sums up what we were saying there in terms of skills. Hey, another way that if we stay in that the imagery of that circle, Ben, the way that you protect your income in a defensive manner is, of course, a buffer. If you think about anyone who had a buffer that was sufficient at the beginning of the interest rate tightening cycle, generally speaking, are in good shape right now because they planned for it. They knew that 0.1% as an emergency cash rate wasn't going to last forever. They knew that it would return to the mean. They knew that at some stage the interest rates would go up in value. So anyone who wanted to protect their income had a buffer in place, right? Because it puts an enormous stress. And there's lots of listeners, Ben, at this stage who, after those 13 interest rate rises, know how much stress those interest rate movements put on the budget. Well, this here is a way that you protect your income. If something like that happens, You have a buffer, a war chest, a rainy day fund that goes, gosh, I'd rather they didn't go up, Ben, but at least I have got something in place to plan for the unplanned.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's a really good point, and I think, in terms of the modeling that we do for optimization here in the business, we do talk about, ideally 12 months, but sort of at a stretch, 6 months is the sort of threshold that we like to talk about. So making sure you've got at least that 6 months, because what is it doing? It's buying you time to recalibrate, looking at ways in which you might be able to reduce some of that discretionary spending to obviously stretch your dollar going further in the event that your job security is taken from you. So if you don't have that buffer, the other alternative, unfortunately, is a side hustle or being able to find different ways to bring in what you might call gap income or short-term income that will alleviate that, and obviously selling other assets to buy some of that value as well. So there are emergency options in terms of what you can do, but take all that stress away, to Bryce's point. Just build up a comfortable savings buffer off the back of the income. So just remember, every dollar's got a job to do. And so if you're changing to going down to one salary for a period of time because you're having a baby or whatever that looks like, just make sure that you are putting some of those dollars away. And again, a quick little reminder, if you're thinking about this and wanting to plan out that, obviously the more platform and money stretch is awesome for working out those buffer points in terms of how long your money is going to last you. So I highly recommend you check that out on the web app of the More platform.
Beat me to the punch, Ben. I was going to
Sorry,
say money
mate, sorry.
stretch is your friend. I
Yes.
knew that you would jump in there, so well done. But that is definitely a bonus point in terms of defense on the income side. Another point for defense on income, Ben, is optimization of tax. So by that, I mean your income can stretch further if, for example, you're a property investor and you need to use less of your income to actually fund any shortfall, right? So that obviously comes down to making sure you get a depreciation schedule, but also the nuance, Ben, of having an accountant who is, we talk a lot about an investment savvy mortgage broker. You want a property savvy accountant. And the reason you want that too, Ben, is as a defense conversation, is because there's plenty of accountants who do amazing work across the economy, but some of them choose to be specialists in a particular lane. Well, it would make sense that you find someone that's a specialist in the lane of property, because if they can find a maximum way to legally claim, optimize and legally maximize the amount of claims that you can, in the traditional sense that the negative gearing system works in this country, it means that particularly non-cash deductions like amortization of loans and non-cash deductions that you find in depreciation, all those non-cash opportunities to maximize then improve the amount of loss that you make in the accumulation phase, which is fine because at some point we will get to the break-even point, Ben, but during the accumulation phase, you maximize and optimize, which means that you can get more cents back for every dollar that you pay in tax, which will obviously underpin the amount of cash flow that you have in your house, which is why we've put it here as a defense strategy under income, because it's important that we have our income going towards the things that we want the most, whilst also optimizing what we can do here in terms of our legally claimed deductions, Ben.
It's money that's legally claimable, to your point, Bryce. So why not take advantage of it and add it to your cash flow pool and income pool? Because if you don't, it's basically just leaving money on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately we do highly encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities. And then finally, Bryce, income protection. So when you're starting out on this journey of income building, trapping surplus to build wealth over time, it's really important to understand that you're the asset. You as the individual who's producing that income until such time as the wealth base and the capital that you have built up over time then supplements you with income that's coming off that capital base, you're it. So, you insure your car, you insure your health and well-being. You're going to produce over $7 million, typical household working 40 years, at least $7 million of income. But if you get injured or hurt or whatever, you're not going to be able to produce anything potentially for a period of time. And then to Bryce's point about the house of cards, I'll tell you what, it's not built on good foundations then. So you've got to make sure that you factor that into your calculations. So don't think of it as a cost, though. Think of it as an investment into an asset that you never, ever really want to call on, because if you are obviously seriously injured or suffering from a life-threatening illness, those income protection policies are worth their weight in gold. It will absolutely, in most cases, change your outlook in terms of the wealth accumulation story. But guess what? Wealth is nothing if you don't have your life, so your health is your wealth. So that's the first thing that we want to protect. So I really do think it's important to make sure that when you're doing your models and your understanding and doing your budgeting, that you have some type of income protection or life trauma or TPD cover as part of that.
Ben, it's worth pointing out that a lot of banks look for this when they are dealing with sophisticated investors. So, for example, if you've got your own home and then you go and buy an investment property, great. But as soon as you start wanting to build and they can see that you're building out a portfolio of property, part of the bank's risk assessment is looking at you to go, all right, you're starting to take on more than the average optimized debt here. And so we want to have some evidence to suggest that, okay, you feel pretty confident about all the things that we talked about before, your job security, and you're increasing your skills, and you've got a buffer in place, and you're maximizing the tax. But from the bank's perspective, they actually want to protect that downside too. So part of you getting more sophisticated in the amount of borrowing, just know that the banks are actually looking at that stuff, and they're going, do you have, we're going to talk about some more insurance in the next column shortly, Ben, or the next circle, but just for this circle, they're going to look at that. Because they're going to go, if something happens to you, we want to make sure we're okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's an asset. You should never look at it as an expense, because ultimately it's an asset, again, you hopefully never want to call on. And it's a bit like when you're paying off a loan of a property, it's appreciating in value. When you're paying off income protection insurance, it can appreciate if you increase the level of income as your income grows. It's usually 70% of the income that it will replace. So, but you got to keep moving that up. So it's a bit like paying the fee for having that protection as part of that. So I think it's really important. If you want to, coming back to the unforgotten pillar, the unforgotten principle of defence, this is why we always want to remind people of it.
Okay, folks, so that's the first circle, income. So we talked about job security, increasing your skills, having a buffer, taxation, and then income protection insurance that's general in nature. You need to talk to financial planners about that. So that's the first circle, top left, Ben. Top right is the second circle, which is just categorized as your lifestyle. We want to protect your lifestyle. And so the defense here, first of all, we need to talk about the ultimate lifestyle beacon, and that's your North Star. So you got to have a clear vision so that you don't get wobbly when times are uncertain, Ben. I've been speaking to a lot of property management businesses of late, and therefore talking to a lot of property landlords. And so one of the overwhelming majority of the conversations that we're having now is people are just saying, I just want to sell this investment property, right? For no reason other than I've got another repair bill, I've got another maintenance bill, the interest rates, I can't see the wood for the trees, right? So if you don't have a clear vision, it makes sense that you get wobbly. And when you get wobbly, you'll need something to anchor that decision to. And if you don't have a North Star, you'll probably anchor it to the easy option of whatever will fix the feeling in the moment, right? So we've talked about this a fair bit, but for those who haven't heard the back catalogue, we always talk about choose hard now for easy later. And that North Star is going to help you be able to stay focused when you have to have a reference point for any decision that you need to make, Ben. And I wonder if people who are listening to this can reflect on that over the last 13 interest rate rises, Ben, where they go, if it wasn't for my North Star, I could have got pretty wobbly. Or someone might be listening to this who did get wobbly and forgot their North Star and might be thinking, I wonder if I should have actually held on. So the first principle here, Ben, is being very, very clear on the North Star.
Yeah, and I'm just going to give a little tip for those people who might get wobbly. Just go on to Google or whatever your search engine portal is and just type in median property price and enter the suburb last 20 years. And just basically see the compounding return that should bring you back. Now, anyone who's done a plan or has financial projections and done the full business, you don't get that wobbly, right? Because the invisible is seen in terms of the models and the projections that are coming off the back of that. So that should straighten you up pretty quickly. But for those people who do get wobbly about, oh, it's just costing me too much and tenants are being more difficult than ever or whatever it is, let's not lose sight of the big picture here. So just go and look at a projection of the long-term performance and then ask the co-pilot or the AI agent these days to extrapolate that out over the next 10 or 15 years, and it'll do it. And then it'll be like, oh, okay, now I know why I'm doing this again, because that ultimately is going to be the asset base of which I'm going to derive my passive income from, or sell down and basically take all that money and go and live on some experiences when I get later in life. So I think that's just a little tip for people to sort of bring context and bring rationality back to, that sort of emotional feeling that sometimes people get.
Yeah, so well said, mate. So there's your North Star. The second one, you just touched on it there, was the planning, right? But you need that roadmap. And
Yep.
we talk about it in our business as the Google Maps of point A to point B, right? So if you're not clear on where you're going and how you want to get there, chances are this could derail your lifestyle as well. So if you're, I don't know, let's just say we're in Perth and we want to get to Adelaide, you can go down via the bottom of Perth and see all those world-class beaches and then rejoin on the Nullarbor. Or you might be in a hurry. You might want to go straight from Perth through the wheat belt across to the Nullarbor, straight through to South Australia. Or if it's Melbourne to Sydney, it's kind of, you can go the coast road or the fast way. And the important thing here is if you have the plan, this will help you make sure that not only are you investing with a clear future purpose in mind, but you're also actually accounting for the here and now. What's going to make my life enjoyable in the here and now that I can plan for, whilst keeping an eye on where we want to go.
Yeah, and as you're building out that, what you're bringing to the table is what you want to achieve as part of that journey, right? Smelling the roses along the way. What's the intent that's driving you towards these outcomes? How does that align to your value and the experiences that you want to have? So it's purposeful and it's meaningful. So it's not just about the money for the sake of the money. All of those things, then bring it in, and then how that connects to those experiences of family and loved ones, or that connection that you need to have, which brings broader happiness in sort of those things. I think you bring all of that together around that sort of story, and you start goals, planning, really start to be a powerful connection point that allow you to be able to continue to keep thriving in this whole idea of lifestyle by design.
Now, Ben, I want to talk to a couple of other parts of the lifestyle part, which again is in the realms of a licensed and experienced and qualified financial planner. But just at the headline level, I wonder if you could talk to TPD and trauma as well as life insurance and why they're important, maybe in the context of your own family situation.
Sure. So total and permanent disability, TPD, and trauma insurances are insurances that kick into place in the event of a diagnosis. And in usual cases, you'll get a lump sum of money, which will allow you to buy time to concentrate on the number one thing, and that is to obviously get your health back on track. Now, if that also means, chemotherapy. So we know that sort of people over the age of 50, you start to get into a 1 in 3 chance of a diagnosis of some type of terminal illness of which you need to address, and hopefully quick. So that's what I call a peace of mind type of policy. Okay, so it's separate to the income protection policies that we were talking about before, and it ultimately comes into that. And then finally, off the back of that, and this is probably the most common one, which they call life policy. They don't call it the death policy, but that's unfortunately what it is. It's a policy whereby at the event of your passing, there is a lump sum of money that's been made available under an insurance policy on your life. And you can get some of those life policies as part of your standard superannuation product, or you can take out an additional policy or something that's separate from that as well. And this is where it is really important that you do talk to your financial planner about the nuances around those policies, because if your super fund or your self-managed super fund is paying for those policies, it's got to be really clear as to who is entitled to access that financial benefit. In some cases, it may be the trustees of the super fund who are acting on behalf of the beneficiaries, and in other cases, that's why it's really important to understand, because the alternate cases, you don't want it trapped inside super. you need to be able to access it over time. And yes, my brother has experienced a very sad affair where his fiance, who was on holidays at the time with the three boys, had a serious fall. Unfortunately, had a bleed on the brain, and unfortunately, she didn't make it through. And so that policy that was in place did allow for my brother to build, repurpose the home, to provide an investment for the boys, and obviously, for them to be able to build their lives, and allowed him to work less to be able to care for them and give them the best opportunities that unfortunately weren't available with the vet's passing. So you can see how those things can really play out. We all, when we're young, we think we're invincible. We think it won't happen to us, but unfortunately, there is a risk of being obviously diagnosed with a serious illness. I had a melanoma last year by way of example. And so I was able to call on that policy that allowed me to have that lump sum payment as part of that treatment. So those are the types of things that do occur, right? So I'm in that 1 in 3 after the age of 50 as part of that. Now I keep getting regular checkups as part of that particular story, but they're good examples of what's available to you, and that's why you have these types of defences in place.
So therefore, we've got this, and thank you for sharing that personal story too, mate. But we've got this spectrum where on one end and the other end is obviously, to your point, life/death insurance. On the other end, it's a more temporary insurance. So it's income protection for some temporary reason why you cannot be at work earning your income, but with the expectation that you will come back to be in your income earning capacity. And then you've got kind of in the middle where something happens that doesn't ultimately immediately take your life, but it's a significant show-stopping, potentially never being able to earn income again event. That really is we're protecting here. Again, these are stuff that people don't like to talk about. It's not the barbecue conversation like what property did we buy, or what loan did you get, or what interest rate did you pay, or what structure have you got for your lending.
Or they don't like paying the money out because they can see it coming, because it's like, well, I don't need it. I don't need it until you do. And that's the hard bit, because I've plenty of times you're looking going, oh, gee, that's a big amount every month that's coming out. I wish that would be paying off my mortgage.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, when you are building up significant wealth, there's a good chance that, the wealth that you have built up is enough. And so you probably don't, as you build up that wealth in terms of the exposure and retiring that debt, you can start to taper off some of those opportunities. I mean, I still have a significant life policy on myself, which will just mean it'll clear all of the debt that we still currently have, but the portfolio of properties is still positively geared. So ultimately, it's just one big lump sum, which means that Jane won't have to worry about going back to work. And same, and a lot of people, this is the other sort of point, Bryce, while we're on this topic, is a lot of people think that they should just do it for the primary income earner and not the partner. Well, the reality is the partner is also really important, because if something happens to the partner, the kids have to be looked after if there's children in it. So if you don't have kids, it's not as critical. But if you're certainly building a family and trying to build a nest egg, you don't want to unwind a good decade of work for not having that type of insurance in place. If you're going to insure your car and your home and contents, it's crazy that you don't insure yourself, in my opinion.
Yeah, my wife and I both have policies, to your point there, Ben. So that's the top right. So we've got the top left circle, which was income. We've got the top right circle there, which is lifestyle. And we talked about the North Star. We talked about planning. We talked about those risk insurance type products to help us with that. So that's with lifestyle. And then if you think about the circle at the bottom, Ben, that takes up this third circle before we find that concentric point in the middle, this is really about the assets, right? This is ultimately what we're left with. Income to buy the assets. That's what we want. And then we've got some planning to make sure that all comes together. So that's kind of the triad there, right? So the first thing when it comes to assets is building insurance. Kind of makes sense. Like anyone who's got a mortgage or a house at the moment, it'd be fair to say it's pretty self-explanatory that in order to get the loan in the first place, the bank wants to see evidence of a policy that's going to protect them. So you should not only have it, but you should be in the routine, in the habit of reviewing and updating those policies to make sure that there's enough for the building, Ben. If that's the right policy, is there someone else that's competitive that can offer you the same or better coverage for a more competitive premium? So that one's pretty self-explanatory, mate.
Well, it is, and I was reading an article in the Fin Review probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Bryce, about this hidden problem in houses where people have the rubber tube with the capping for plumbing.
Yep.
And so I'm not going to quote the name of the company that was around, but like that, they basically, and I know in our house, that's basically instead of using copper piping and all that, which can become really expensive, they'll crimp the ends of these hoses. Well, guess what? 10 or 15 years is the lifespan of those hoses. So they're all popping. And so water damage, like water damage is
The enemy.
the enemy. And so there were stories of, okay, people were away for a week. They come back in the house, that pipe popped on the top floor and it's been, so the house is flooded, all the floorboards are ruined, all of the plasterboard, like the whole thing effectively. So it's a real problem, right? So, and even with some of those insurance policies, what you need to do is read the fine print in terms of, are you protected in the event? Because if they turn around and say, well, you knew you had that type of plumbing in your house and you didn't get it changed over, so your insurance policy is void, right? So because you didn't get the maintenance done on it and the upkeep done on it. So that certainly was a little scare point for me when I'm thinking, ooh, well, most of these houses are built this way with these sort of crimping tools on this sort of rubber and steel enforced hoses. But if they split, because they're always under pressure, right? So yeah, it's just a little timely reminder for those people like me who are a little bit risk adverse, Bryce.
Yes, you are risk adverse, which is a good thing. It served you well. So that's building insurance for there, Ben. The next one is protecting you against the tenant. So landlord's protection insurance, right? So tenant-related risks, rent defaults, malicious damage, loss of rental income, accidental damage. But not all policies are the same here, Ben. So it's important that we used to say when I first got involved, it was this tongue in cheek, right? But if you've got landlord's protection insurance, you don't have to worry about the landlord, the tenant. Just they want to build their Harley on your living room floor, off they go. No worries. If they make some form of damage or whatever to your house, you're covered. So there's good policies and there's bad policies, but ultimately, if you don't have landlord's protection insurance in place, even if you have building insurance in place, you are really leaving yourself exposed and your defense is not complete.
No, that's right. It's definitely not complete. And so I always say to people, make sure that you're ticking the boxes, right? It's really, really important. Mitigate risk. I mean, we've spoken enough about this at multiple podcasts, so there's not a lot to talk, but it's like, please, make sure you've got that rental and make sure you've, for contents damage, those type of things. For the thing is content damage and also for unpaid rent. They're your two ones. You can ramp the policy up also for when you want to go to tribunals and something. There might be some provisions in there as well. But yeah, that to me is really important.
One little tip for serious property investors is you can outsource some of this stuff. You can get your property manager to, if you've got body corporate fees, Ben, or council rates or whatever. One little tip is never, ever outsource the insurance payments to anyone else but yourself. So you can outsource everything except for insurance. Because what happens if your poor property manager does accidentally forget to pay the bill, right? And then something happens, they're going to feel dreadful, but there's nothing that they can do to undo, I forgot to pay that. Now, if you forget to pay the council rates, you can do that. If you forget to pay the body corporate fees, but if you forget to pay the insurance and then you go to make a claim and they say you don't have a policy that's up to date, boy, oh boy, oh boy. So, Ben, one of the features that I'm looking forward to most in more, and it's a future feature, is you'll be able to log on, you'll be able to get a dashboard that shows you all your key dates. So the key dates, just going in there and just knowing when each and every single one of your insurance policies is lapsing is worth its weight in gold. Because if any of those ever lapse, that'll be a nightmare for you if you find out the hard way, Ben. So that's super important that you don't outsource that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, mate, ditto. Like, there's really not much more I could say about that. That just, yeah, key reminder dates are definitely going to be a massive improvement in terms of how people can manage their portfolio inside more. So I'm looking forward to that being built as well.
All right, so talk us through this last one here, Ben, for this last pillar under assets regarding professional property management.
Yeah, so with professional property management, well, let me wear my picker hat first, right? So, what's happening in tenancy reform land across Australia is significant. There's a reasonable disparity now being formed about different policies and regulations and rules and minimum standards and all of those types of things. So, if you own a property in, 3 properties, one in each different state, you've got to be across a fair bit of legislation. And now, in a lot of respects, I mean, just to give you an example, I was looking at the new legislation in New South Wales, and there's now penalty points, right? So I can get 100 penalty points for an unfair eviction of my tenant in New South Wales. Now, penalty points in New South Wales are worth $100. And so if I've got 100 penalty points, $110. So if I've got 100 penalty points, that's an $11,000 fine, that I would potentially have in terms of paying that fine. Now, let's say, looking at the legislation, they've got one for misleading documentation, 2 for incorrect eviction. So that's a $22,000 fine. Now, if I didn't know that and I was acting on my own behalf, these tenancy associations are government funded, well funded. They want to make an example of the very small, minute number of investors who are doing the wrong thing. Well, that's going to light up in lights, and they'll make an example, and it's a $22,000 fine. So, by way of example, not only if you're breaching the rules, you don't get a slap on the wrist, you're actually going to get fined in some states and territories. So, that in itself should be enough reason to sort of say, if I can't keep up with the legislation, how am I going to successfully manage my property for safe and quiet enjoyment of my tenant? It becomes very difficult.
Yeah, I think ultimately that just sums it up. Really, you think that you can save a few pennies, Ben, at the expense of a ton of other stuff, tenant selection, compliance, risk, maintenance risk. There's just a ton of risks of self management. So therefore, the defence play for your asset is to have it insured, is to have the tenant insured, and have someone professionally looking after you, after the property on your behalf, Ben, so you give yourself the best chance.
And Bryce, I can't jump on a plane and go interstate and inspect the 5 apartments that I've got in Brisbane in the unit block that I own up there. Like, I can't claim that as a tax deduction anyway, right? So that's all gone for me. And so then I've got to coordinate those 5 different tenants in each of those properties to then go on, so I can get through it in a reasonable amount of time. I'm not really building relationship with those tenants as well. So it just doesn't make economic sense that I would do that. Now, if I own one property, it's next door to where I live, maybe, just maybe. But then in a lot of cases, you probably don't want to know that the tenant knows. So there's not a lot of reasons why I would say it other than being stingy in terms of trying to save money. And you have one tenancy dispute in the tribunal, and let's say you might have saved $6,000 or $7,000 over a couple of years by self-managing. All of that will be gone in terms of your time and energy. And if you lose the case, potentially in the fine that you're going to pay as well. So we just think it's really sensible that you use a professional, licensed real estate, property manager.
So, folks, hopefully we built that picture for you, right, when it comes to defence. You've got the top left-hand side here. You've got your income circle. Top right-hand side, you've got your lifestyle circle. And down the bottom, in the middle, is the asset. So when they come together, combined, you really want to make sure that you're in the sweet spot there, Ben. So that's kind of the overarching thought process for this framework here. But of course, we also have another framework, Ben, that is very, very important here on the Property Couch, which is A, B, C, D. So we've talked about the A and the D. So it's just worth, outside of that imagery of those 3 concentric circles, there's a couple of others that you just wanted to add some meat on the bones, just to make sure that our loyal podcasters, Ben, know that, hey, you've missed 2 pillars there. What's going on?
Well, that's right. You're doing these concentric circles, right? So that's not our ABCD formula, but I think it's just important to note the interconnectivity between defensive strategy and expenses, or cash flow management, and also borrowing power. So it's just a quick reminder that when you are looking at defenses from an expense or cash flow point of view, spend less than you earn. Right? It's pretty simple in terms of making sure that you're doing that and you're capturing that. And then from a borrowing power point of view, yes, you might be able to borrow a certain amount based on the paperwork or from a particular lender. And we always want to make sure that we are optimizing for that. But it still ultimately comes back to what sort of level of effective buffers do you have? So we talked about buffers earlier. And if, in some cases, if you've got a bit of equity there, you can also potentially grab, say, a $20,000 loan split to the side, which is an emergency element that you can also do. So, when you sit down with a sophisticated advisor and you do some modeling on that, that can potentially be a little buffer, like another little insurance policy that you can take out when speaking to your mortgage broker. So it is about making sure that you're optimizing, but you're not doing anything outside your scope of risk. Okay. And then bringing that back into that risk profile that you have. So if you're really high risk, then you're going to optimize to the highest possible point and you're going to have less of those buffers, but you run the risk of, sort of this idea of great gains, great risk, great rewards. True. But if you don't get it right, then obviously you can have a very, very large correction on your hand, which can be a real wealth destroyer as well. So I think that's really important in terms of how we put all that together. And then finally, on the asset side, it's really important that we remember that, and we've been talking about this recently, based on the fundamentals that we see from the brilliant global investors and world investors. We always talk about margin of safety, and we always talked about productive use. And so when we think about when we're buying property, we want to see whether that piece of land has had its full productive use. So if it's got a single dwelling on there, then there's potential future use of that. So you get a little bit of defense or risk mitigation associated with buying that freestanding asset. And then sort of, that brings in this concept of margin of safety. So when we are thinking about defense, we're always expanding that messaging out there and talking about risk mitigation and risk management. And so there are some of the ways around how you manage your expenses, how you look at your borrowing exposures, and then ultimately how you're selecting those properties. And of course, to finish that property story off, the other risk exposure is around new versus old, because you're paying a premium for the new on, you want to get an older property, and that means your land to asset ratio is higher. And again, reducing that risk or the downside risk associated with that. So I just thought those other things would tie nicely into today's framework.
There you go, folks. Hopefully that's reminded you on a couple of the basics, helped you lift your eyes on a couple of other things too, but just to remind us that in order for our defence to be in play, we're really trying to protect our income, our assets, and our lifestyle. That's ultimately what we're doing here. Whilst also within the other pillars, Ben just covered off a few of those things. So let us know if that helped, folks. We'd love to know what you want us to talk about. You can always go to any of our channels, Ben. You can go onto our socials. You can write us an email. You can go onto the website. You can leave us a speak pipe. We haven't done a Q&A session for a little while, so it's a call to arms here for folks to say, What are your questions? What do you want us to talk about? What's a framework that you want to see? Give us something that you have seen that you want us to comment on. We would love to hear from you. Go to thepropertycouch.com.au. There's a little widget on the side. You can leave your name and your details and let us know what you want to hear from us. And we're happy to provide that for you. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is about simplifying the reading experience on the interweb, right? So imagine I use Chrome. I use Google Chrome, Ben.
Yep.
So there, if you go to Google Chrome, on the right-hand side, there's three little dots, the little button. So you can click that little button.
There's
and
a
down
special
the bottom,
name for that too. I can't remember what it is, but
come
yes,
on, give me the name. What is it?
the
Ben?
three little dots. I'm gonna look that up while you keep talking.
The three little dots, and then down the side, there's one of the options is called More Tools. MORE, Ben, not MOOR, as you might expect it to be. You'd think Google, after your little fist pump with Sergey last week, you'd think that he would have changed that for you, but no, he hasn't. So it's just go to the More Tools. And then one of the options is called Reading Mode. And so what that does is when you're on a web page that's got lots of text and pictures and stuff, and if you click reading mode, it just opens up a window on the side of the page, and it's just like a book. You just start reading the text. So it's good when you're on a blog, Ben,
Ooh, that's
or when you're on
nice.
a page where you just need to cut through. It's a nice little way to read optimally, efficiently, and ideally in a speedy manner. So check that out. Did I buy you enough time to work out what the
You
three little
did,
dots
you
are?
did. I've definitely got it. And shout out to the recent webinar we did on More. If you haven't checked that out, we did a webinar recently where I was talking about those three little dots on the More platform. They're called ellipses. So ELLIPSIS. So ellipses.
Ellipsis. Even if it's the hamburger one where it's got the vertical lines, which More has?
No, the
More's
hamburger
got
one is different.
the
That's
horizontal
different.
line,
These are just the three little dots that sort of ellipsis. I think is the
ellipsis.
pronounce ellipses. If there's
Oh,
three of them, a plural versus singular. But there you go.
I probably prefer to call them the three little dots.
It's easier for us lay people, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll go the three little dots. So, folks, three little dots, down to More Tools, click reading mode, check it out, and let us know what you think. But that's to simplify your reading experience when you're on the interweb, Ben, checking something out. Hey, mate, what's making property news?
Bryce, what's making property news? I want to talk about the PIPA survey. So we'll obviously put a link into the show notes where you'll be able to download the full survey. But certainly there's been some interesting findings in here, right? So this year's survey found that 14.1% of respondents sold at least one investment property in the past year. Now, that's an increase of 12.1% from last year. Now, of those investors exiting the market, their properties were bought by another investor 31% of the time. So that's up from 24%. So there's been a little bit of a improvement in terms of some of those investors taking over from the existing investor there. But here's where it becomes concerning. However, overwhelmingly, those rental properties were bought by existing homeowners, 44%, or first home buyers, which is 21%. So if you think about that, what we're basically saying is a third of those properties have left the rental market. So that is in itself challenging. We heard last week Tim from the HIA sort of talking to that story. So it's showing up everywhere in terms of, why did they sell those properties? Well, there's lots of research inside that in terms of the reason that we're seeing a challenge. We're seeing basically investors not necessarily happy about some of the reforms that are going on, and that's ultimately led to a lack of confidence, and that lack of confidence has led to an exodus and potentially not as much investment activity coming into the market. So I think there's a lot more information inside that report. We could do a whole show on it. We've done that in the past. Maybe we'll come back for it. As I said, this is a pre-recorded episode. We might come back for it at a later date where I start unpacking a few more of those potential items. But that just gives you a little sample of what's happening when it comes to the latest PIPA survey. And thank you to all of those people who spent, it took 30 or so minutes to fill it in. And there's
How many
a lot
respondents,
more.
Ben?
Just under 1,300, Bryce. So I think it was like 1,200 and get the exact number right. It was around sort of that 1,280 odd from memory. But yeah, so just under 1,300, Bryce.
Yeah, gotcha. Well done. Yeah, it's hard to pull that together. It'd be nice to think one day we'll get 10,000 people out of the 2.3 in that, but at least it's a significant enough sample size to actually be able to draw some trends from it.
Well, let's just, here's just, I'll leave you with this other stat, Bryce, a little teaser. So where did they sell? 26% sold in Brisbane, 15% sold in Sydney, 4% in Perth, 1% in Darwin, 1% in Canberra, 4% in Adelaide, 1% in Hobart, 22% in Melbourne. So 26% Brisbane, 22% Melbourne, 15% Sydney. Now, there's a concentration there that's typical, but no one else is selling in those other markets that are attractive for investors.
Yeah, interesting, right?
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. So, very good, mate. Well, another big episode for us. Hopefully, giving some people some things to think about the forgotten pillar today, Ben. But until next week, mate.
Well, travel safely first and foremost, mate. Make it a safe and happy trip. But until next week, mate, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
See you next week, folks.